I think that's about it, Bill.
I think it is too. Andy, how are you?
I'm all right, Bill. How are you doing?
I've had a fine day in the pandemic.
The evening's just getting started.
Yeah, it is.
Hey, everybody that's watching. We have that ghostly 21st century sensation of addressing people who we cannot see. We have no way to read your body language. We have no way to get a sense for if you're enjoying this or not.
Yeah, that's the nature of life right now, which is not very, it's not ideal.
Yeah, it's not.
Especially if you've spent as much time as I think both of us have reveling in face-to-face interactions in the micro sort of design of social spaces throughout history, which is what our book is about, basically.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Yeah, the way that this book feels now, thinking about it and just thinking about a lot of the issues that we talk about it and a lot of the topics, it feels very different now than it did, a couple months ago, a couple weeks ago, I guess.
So, Andy, maybe I'll just introduce the book to people who've never heard of it.
Yeah.
This is called Closing Time. This is the book Andy and I wrote. It is subtitled Saloons, Taverns, Dives, and Watering Holes of the Twin Cities. And basically, it's a history of the Twin Cities as told through the life and times of 50 bars that have, or saloons, or watering holes. And each chapter is very short, digestible, sort of micro history of 50 different establishments that have existed throughout from 1838 to the present day, or 2015, maybe 2010. But some of them are still around today. And well, not today, like we were talking about. Actually, they were around until March, I should say. And who knows what the future will hold for some of the establishments that still exist in the book. But that's kind of what it's about, Andy. What do you have anything to add?
No, that's exactly it. In terms of how it came about, Josh Leventhal from the Historical Society Press approached us about 2 years ago at this point and proposed the idea. And it was one of these things where it was kind of surprising that there was really not quite a book like this. There were a lot of great books about, beer and about drinking culture in the upper Midwest and in Minnesota. But there really didn't seem to be anything that just kind of rounded up all of the bars and kind of looked at it from a, sweeping historic perspective. So, so he put the idea to us, and in terms of how we put it together, the idea was we sat down one evening at a bar, at a couple of bars, a series of them, and made a spreadsheet of about 100 different places that we could think of that we thought we would want to include. And from there, winnowed it down to about 50 and split them up, 25 for Bill, 25 for me. I tended to get the Minneapolis side of the river where I live, and Bill tended to get the St. Paul side of the river. Bill tended to get the newer ones because Bill's particular genius is for walking into bars and sitting, at the end and sort of ingratiating himself with everybody there. Real talent for that. My talents lie more in cold calling, 65-year-old people in the suburbs whose great grandfathers ran bars on Hennepin Avenue 100 years ago, and asking if they had any information about those places. And so I tended to get a lot of the older bars. So a lot of the 19th century bars were me, but not entirely. We kind of, we split it up by what we were interested in and what we thought we could find information on. And that's how that went.
Yeah. You want to talk a little bit about the chronological stuff, Andy? I'm trying to get the feed up so I can see the questions.
Oh, okay.
And it's not as easy as I thought. So
yeah.
Why don't you talk about how the book's set up just for a second here?
Okay, I'll talk about that. And I should say that we are going to address comments that are coming through on the feed as soon as we find them. Bill and I made this rule at the opening, but if you have a suggestion for a bar that we omitted, we will not respond to your request unless you phrase it in this exact way. You idiots, how could you have forgotten blank establishment? So if you don't call us idiots, we will not respond. The book is laid out chronologically. The idea was to to kind of walk through the entire, 150-year history from place to place. A lot of the bars in the book have been around for 25 years or 50 years or quite a bit longer in a few cases. And so what we tried to do is identify a particular moment in time for each of them. And we roughly space those like every 5 or 10 years. It starts with Pig's Eye Perrant's saloon in 1838. And then kind of goes in 5-year increments from there. And it's not structured really formally. It's a more kind of informal structuring where you get the sense that you're moving forward in time as you go. And so, part of it was figuring out what year do you talk about the hexagon? I've lived in the Twin Cities for 15 years. I've gone to the hexagon on and off for, that whole time. So do you identify the, hexagon of like the early 2000s or the hexagon of the 1930s or the hexagon of the 1950s? And so part of it was trying to figure out how to situate these places in time. And usually there was some anecdote that we could connect it to, whether an anecdote that we found in newspaper reporting or something else. So, with the Red Dragon, for example, there was a really great account of the opening for the Red Dragon on Lindale Avenue when it opened in the late 70s. And so it started there for that one. And then, the angle with the Red Dragon, of course, is the Wondrous Punch, which is a very famous drink that most people have tried at one time or another.
Andy, that story is really wonderful. And I like to, the Wondrous Punch is you could write a whole book about just that thing. So one of the tragedies, it's actually not a tragedy. It's just sort of a promising, lovely feature of our book is that it's got 50 books inside of it. Basically, you could write a really interesting sort of like early 2000s novel about the Wondrous Punch and how it wandered throughout Minneapolis and like represented so many different things at different times and how it still clings on in the Red Dragon to this day. I don't know. That's just a nice detail. But yeah, what's in the Wondrous Punch, Andy? Do you know that?
Yeah. Well, let's see here. I think it's there's grenadine in there. There's 151 proof rum. It's a bunch of different types of rum and pineapple juices and grenadine, I think. Although this is one of the things that people have really like set opinions about in terms of what's in it. And there's a lot of information on the internet. I think one of the things that ended up getting in the book was, there was like a cocktail forum or something, or like a hospitality industry forum that somebody who had claimed to work at the Red Dragon had left, what they purported to be the true recipe and the true proportions of rum to, everything else that's in there. And of course, it's just like something posted on the internet, 12 years ago, like who knows how accurate it is. But that's kind of the way it is with a lot of bar stories. Like a lot of them are very dubious, veracity, I guess. Like you hear stories and you think, well, that's probably true. That might not be true.
Yeah, that's kind of the experience I had too, which is like one of the examples of this is what is the oldest bar in the city, right? I mean, you talk to someone in one place and they'll tell you one story. You talk to someone in another place, you'll hear something else, and finding out information like definitive knowledge about this is really hard because, well, you can look at property records, which is something that you're better at, Andy. You can ask people. That's something I'm better at, I suppose. And it's really, but knowing the truth, I mean, that's hard. That's almost impossible. And so basically, we tried to be as accurate as anyone can possibly be about the places in the book, but I can't guarantee that anything in there is 100% true. Or can we? I mean,
no, I don't know. I guess it depends. We're not historians necessarily. We're writers that write about history, but maybe there's a difference there. I mean, a lot of what we know about these places is because journalists drink so much. There was just so many of these places, we wouldn't know anything about them, especially before, 1950, 1960, when you get out of living memory. We just wouldn't know anything about a lot of these places if there wasn't, a deadline at the St. Paul Globe or at the Minneapolis Tribune, and somebody needed like a little bit of local color. So, they'd go down to the bar and saddle up to it and, ask what the what the kind of what the gossip was of the moment. And you get this really kind of beautifully written, maybe somewhat dubiously reported, but really colorful just account of what all the people at the bar were talking about, and what the surroundings were like. So I mean, even just in terms of like trying to figure out what some of these places looked like, you would just get these really wonderful descriptions in the in the reporting about these places, and from very
Some of my favorites were from the St. Paul Globe, which was a newspaper. It's one of the only St. Paul newspapers that was actually digitized, so a researcher like ourselves can go through and search for addresses or names or specific places and search the archives. That's not true for every newspaper, but the St. Paul Globe was only around from 1878 to 1905. And it was a real salacious, like yellow journalism type of rag, where I just picture the journalist coming down the block from his office and needing something juicy to sell papers the next day, and wandering into the American House Saloon, which was a block away on Wabasha Street in downtown St. Paul, and trying to gin up some something fun, some guys getting into a bar fight or someone dying or whatever, or some juicy gossip about a murder trial. Those are some of the stories that I found in the St. Paul Globe, and I really appreciated the 19th century journalists' take. But some of the stuff you're talking about too is up until the 1950s and the 1970s and to the present day. Don Boxmeyer is another St. Paul journalist who wrote a lot about bars. Klobuchar, the senator's Jim Klobuchar is another example of a guy who would have stories in there. R.T. Ryback actually is cited in the book when he was a journalist for the Star Tribune. So it's sort of a common thread for a lot of journalists to go into bars and write about what was happening in them.
And a lot of the newspapers that we pulled from the St. Paul Globe in particular, they were kind of partisan operations. And the St. Paul Globe was a very democratic newspaper. And the Jumbo Saloon in Minneapolis, the Minneapolis newspaper was a very Republican-leaning newspaper, but the owner of the Jumbo Saloon was really heavily involved in Democratic politics. So there'd always be reports about things that were going on at Jumbo's for the, Democratic partisans in, Minneapolis, and for the benefit of the Democratic partisans in St. Paul that wanted to know, what was going on with the party on that side of the river.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of good politics in the book too. Andy, I have some questions here on Facebook. I don't know. You want to tackle some of this stuff?
I'd be happy to. Can I start making my drink here? Is that?
Oh yeah, should we do a cheers, Andy? Is that?
Well, I need to make my drink real quick. So I'm really getting down to
one of the questions is a comment actually. You can write a book about the bad decisions that were made post Wondrous Punch. How many children were conceived, blood lost, breakups, and or makeups? And yeah, that's what I know about the Wondrous Punch, and I think I've only had it once. At the Red Dragon, but it started at the Nankin restaurant. Is that correct, Andy?
Yeah, that's right. Which was the major Chinese restaurant in downtown
Minneapolis.
Downtown Minneapolis, and for most of the 20th century. And the Wanderer's Punch, as it was called there, was it was kind of the highlight of the menu there. It's one of these things that if you talk to a Twin Cities person over the age of like 45 or so, 50, they'll have really strong memories of the Nankin. But yeah, the Wondrous Punch at the Red Dragon was descended from the Wondrous Punch at the Nankin. I had two Wondrous Punch.
The recipes sort of like moved around a little bit and probably been reinvented a bunch of different times. And what I read about Nankin, and it was this amazing kind of Chinese restaurant and a kind of peak Orientalism period of American culture also, where I was sort of over the top and there was a fish tank. Well done, Andy. That looks like some good cocktail work right there. But they would also serve strong drinks, and so it was a place for people to go to experience the wonders of the East and also just kind of get hammered also. And so that's what I know about the Wondrous Punch. And it was a mix of many different kinds of liquor, and it was very sweet and it came in large quantities. So it was sort of a thing that made people transform themselves, and you can still find it at the Red Dragon, except not right now, like we were saying. The other question is, what are some of the alternatives for the oldest St. Paul bar, or the oldest bar? Let's just say Twin Cities bar. One of the challenges with answering this question properly, to me, is that prohibition is such a black hole of knowledge. Like, we don't know which bars survived that period, almost 20 years where bars were illegal. And so saying my traditional answer to the oldest St. Paul bar is the Spot Bar in Randolph and Victoria, which has been around since about 1887. But I don't know what it was like there in 1925. So it's hard there's not really information about that. I don't know, Andy, how old was Prochnow where we met? We started the book by talking about Prochnow.
Well, and the thing is,
what's the oldest bar in Minneapolis?
Yeah, I guess, but it's a semantic question, because it's like, does the oldest bar mean the building that has been occupied by a drinking establishment for the longest period of time? Does it mean, the establishment that has had the longest unbroken, ownership for the longest period of time? There's all these ways to kind of judge it. It's one of the surprises of the book, actually, was one of the chapters early on is about a place called Mars, which some of you with drinking memories prior to about 1975 might remember. But it was on Washington Avenue, and it was owned by a succession of women. It was owned by a woman whose husband had killed himself, and she had to take over the liquor license, and then she passed it on to her son. Her son was an alderman. He went to jail for a couple of years for accepting bribes, and so his wife had to take over the place. And it had been open since about the early 1890s. And so I was writing about this place, and I realized, oh, this is Cuzzy's. Because I was like, this street address seems really familiar. Mars was Cuzzy's, and if you know what Cuzzy's looks like on Washington, it's still there. It's just this sort of it's this square kind of tube. It's just like this really small building that goes all the way back. And the reason it looks like that is because it had originally been twice as long, and then it got cut in half for a parking lot, and it had originally been twice as high, and somebody had cut the top off, for whatever.
Kind of like the last piece of pie in a Minnesota like potluck.
Yeah, it's the last bar that nobody will, like, the bar in terms of a sweet dessert item. It's the last bar that nobody wants to take or nobody will take because they're too polite. So just the fact that Cuzzy's has been open and continuously operated as a bar by different families, but going all the way back to the late 1880s, early 1890s, like that's some real longevity. And so there were little surprises like that, but yeah, I don't know if you would count Prochnow as the oldest bar because, it wasn't a bar for like 40 or 50 years in the middle.
And honestly, if you're going to do that, you might as well put Waldman's in the mix because it was a saloon from 1858 to 1861. So that's a long time ago, and it's probably gets the record for the building that's got the oldest saloon in it, unless you count some of the caves, right? But then it was closed for 150 years.
Yeah, so
1861, 1960. Yeah, that's a long time to be closed. But it's open again today, except not today, like we were saying. So, but yeah, that might be the winner. But yeah, it is a semantic question. It's hard to really answer. But someone on the comments pointed out Newman's Bar in North St. Paul should qualify.
Yeah.
And, another question we got here, Andy, was about are there bars that are in just outside the city limits of Minneapolis and St. Paul that might have qualified or been in the book, or did we include anything in the suburbs or the close first-ring suburbs? And the one that springs to mind is the Left Guard in Bloomington.
Guard in Richfield, yeah. That's a really good question. I actually wish that we had included a couple more. The one that comes to mind is Frenchman's in Richfield. Which has been around since the 1930s. And it's one of those places where you go in and on one hand, it feels very old just in terms of like the spatial qualities, but it's also been renovated, so often that, it's kind of indistinguishable from a place that would have opened like 10 or 20 years ago. But yeah, the suburban one that we have in there is the Left Guard in Richfield, which was that was another really fascinating story that I just hadn't known anything about. The Left Guard was a singles club, and it was supposedly, by gross receipts, the busiest and most profitable singles bar in the entire country. There was an article in Time magazine about it in 1973. And it was opened by two Green Bay Packers that, wanted to open like a classy steak joint. So like it's all like dark wood paneling and like giant, blown up photographs of, the great moments of the history of the Green Bay Packers on the wall, and like sports paraphernalia.
It seems like most retired football players want to open up classy steak joints. But it turns out to go wrong.
But and it just became this place where, like, if you were a 30-year-old single person and you wanted to meet another 30-year-old single person, it was kind of the place where you went. And they were kind of horrified by it, is the sense that I got, because they closed it down, and they claimed they were going to run a bulldozer through it and just kind of get rid of everything, and then opened a Mexican restaurant that eventually became Chi-Chi's. So there you go.
Wow, who knew Chi-Chi's had a pedigree?
Yeah, Chi-Chi's has like a serious, Green Bay Packers owned and operated 70s singles bar history.
Some other questions are about a speakeasy downtown named the Green Lantern, bars that didn't make it into the book and maybe could be in a sequel. And then questions about Southeast Como bars, which Manning's and Sporty's. And I actually really like that question because it gets into one of the themes of the book. To me, is about the tension in neighborhoods that existed in both cities. In Minneapolis, more sort of explicitly, and in St. Paul in a more sort of latent manner. But between sort of the moral purity of the residential neighborhood and the bar, which is a stain on society, or was perceived by that way by certain segments of both cities' populations for a long, long time, and to this day. So that part of Southeast Como, in that specific industrial but also residential part of Minneapolis, is really interesting because it walks that line very carefully. And those two bars along Southeast Como, I think, are good examples of what probably were at some point a 3-2 establishments. And I do want to mention 3-2 bars as being a specifically Minnesota thing. I think we are still the last state in the country that has 3-2 liquor laws still on the books somewhere. And there still is a 3-2 bar in Minneapolis. The last one in, I think, the whole Twin Cities metro area is in North Minneapolis, very close to the northern border of Minneapolis, called a Tea Shop, where you go there. You can't go today, but in a month or two, perhaps it'll still be around, and you could go and you'll get Shell's Light and Shell's Dark. And I believe those are your choices for beer. But that was a very common thing. There used to be hundreds of 3-2 bars in Minneapolis and St. Paul, in the quieter residential neighborhoods, like on Lake Street or in Highland, that just aren't around anymore, and it's sort of a lost social space that I don't think we even have.
Well, that's one of the things that's so interesting about Matt's Bar in South Minneapolis. I mean, the reason why Matt's Bar has been, open for as long as it has is because of the attraction of the Juicy Lucy, and sort of the cult item that is the Juicy Lucy, and just the sort of respect that people have for the experience and the kind of desire to be a part of this experience. But without the Juicy Lucy, Matt's would have closed 30 years ago probably. And so there's this aspect when you go into Matt's, you're getting a taste of like what that 3-2 neighborhood bar vibe was like, that's been preserved solely because of this famous cheeseburger.
Yeah, and that cheeseburger is famous. And but what was the name of it? Was Nibs, right?
Oh yeah, it was Nibs. That was another
fun, Mr. Nib, or how that name came to be. There was 2 different bars that he opened. That's the other thing that I noticed researching this book, was that the same proprietor used to have like different establishments, not like chains though, because I think it was illegal most of the time to own different liquor licenses. And so
Yeah.
you get like your cousin or your wife or your brother or someone else connected to you to start a bar, and you would be the owner, but it would be in their name kind of deal. There's a lot of weird gray area rules that were made and broken around bar history in both Minneapolis and St. Paul.
That are enforced more or less vigorously depending on your, background and your.
Yeah, exactly. We should get into some of that stuff.
Your identity, yeah. But Matt's Bar had originally been called Nibs, and apparently the Juicy Lucy was invented at Nibs. And then when Matt Bristol bought it, he just, he bought the whole thing. he bought the idea of the Juicy Lucy too. And Nibs Martin, who'd originally opened another place called, I think, Mr. Nibs. It had a couple names, but it was in the old Hub of Hell neighborhood.
Seward.
Yeah, over in Seward. And apparently he had a Juicy Lucy on the menu there too, but I don't know, it didn't quite take off. And the Juicy Lucy is one of these things where, it really doesn't appear in print until like the 1980s. It's not really until the 1980s that people start writing about it locally in any kind of significant way. So you get the sense that it was this very kind of under the radar sort of open secret that people knew about and people talked about, but didn't necessarily have this sort of iconic status. And that was only later that it took that on.
Andy, I want to go rapid fire through some of these questions that are coming in. And if I'm stumped, maybe I'll ask you, but question about the halftime rec and the fact that the halftime rec in St. Paul on Front Street is short for recreation. Where did the title come from? Well, a lot of bars used to be pool halls, and recreation was short for that. So that was kind of a common thing back in the day. Let's see. Comment that Sporty's 3-2 was 3-2 until 1998 at least. A question about tide houses. The best of my knowledge, tide houses disappeared after Prohibition. So before then, there were tide houses, and then afterwards, maybe it was illegal. I'm not sure if you know the full story on that one, Andy. Station 280, did it used to be a bowling alley? I looked this one up. Station 280 used to be lots of stuff. It was a lumber furniture company. It was a farm equipment distributor. I do not... Oh, yes, it was All-American Bar and Bowling. Part of it was a bowling alley, but it has a much longer history, and it's a very strange place. I don't know if you've been there, Andy. Have you been to Station 280?
I have, yeah.
Wow, what a weird joint. Okay, let's see other questions. How do you feel about Prochna? What bars didn't make it into the book, Andy? We didn't answer that one.
Well, I mean, aside from some of the suburban ones that people had mentioned, like Frenchman's, I kind of wish that had gotten in there. I mean, some of you have probably already heard this before. The chapter that got cut that I was really bummed about was I wrote a sparkling, comprehensive overview of the history of bars at Minneapolis St. Paul International Airport, including Cheers. There was a I don't know if some of you all remember that one. There was like a Cheers.
There was a TV show, right, Andy? Am I remembering that right?
Show, but it was also a bar at the airport where there was like a fiberglass sculpture of either Cliff Clavin or Norm. I forget which one. You could sit next to it and get your photo taken. But when the Minneapolis St. Paul International Airport expanded in the 60s, and the idea is that it was going to go from just this kind of like regional, hub, like these kind of dirt runways where, little like regional flyers are going to be taking business people to Omaha or whatever. And then it was going to be this international hub for, Northwest Orient Airlines. And there were going to be people coming from Frankfurt and Tokyo. And there was this real horror that people would come to the Minneapolis St. Paul International Airport and they would be really put out that they couldn't find a bar, because a bar is symptomatic of a thriving, bustling metropolis. And there was a lot of anxiety that if you opened a bar at Minneapolis St. Paul International Airport, all the Skid Row denizens were going to make their way down to Bloomington and plant themselves at the bar and run the property values down or something, I guess. But it was this really contentious kind of issue that had a lot of hand-wringing about the identity of the Twin Cities. It was like, oh my God, is the Twin Cities actually like a really provincial place full of Bible thumpers and morally upstanding people that are no fun, or is it a really hip, thriving metropolis that everybody says is super cool? Which is like, that's an argument that has been going on for the last.
That's a fundamental tension of Minnesota.
That's like a fundamental tenet. So to see that being played out like over a bar at the airport, in the 1950s and early 60s, I thought was really interesting. So that bar was called Les Voyageurs, and that chapter was cut, unfortunately, but it'll be in closing time too.
Yeah, there was a bar that I wanted to write about that was called the Townhouse, and it's still around on University Avenue. It's been renamed the Black Heart, and it's a soccer bar, but they still have drag shows. So I tried to get that into the book. The other one I wanted to get into the book was called the Terminal Bar, and it's in Northeast Minneapolis, right at Central and Hennepin when they come together. And in both cases, I tried and failed to get enough information to make a real good chapter. Part of the way the book was written was you just had to be sort of tactical. So the strategy was to like cover all these different facets and geographies and time periods and populations and communities. But then once you did research, you found out, oh, there's no information about this. And over here, a bar I didn't even know about actually has a great story to tell. So you had to kind of go with the flow. And if you're reading the paper and you discover something amazing that you didn't hear about before, then you throw that bar into the book because that's got evidence. And so, we kind of had to just be flexible about the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, some of the reason why some of the bars were chosen for, chosen to be in the book are based just on like, we had a really good photograph of it. Like there's a bar called the Grotto Bar that was down by Union Depot in St. Paul. And it was exactly what it sounded like. It was, somebody had designed the interior to look like a grotto, so it was this really fantastical image. And there was very little information about it. Nobody seemed to own it for more than like 2 years. It was torn down to become a gas station, which again is a really
honestly, I think grotto bars were sort of like the axe throwing bars of their day, just like a dumb trend that like was big for 4 years in the 1890s or something.
Well, maybe people were building grottos. I mean, it was funny thing is it was built at the same time as like the those of you that know your roadside attractions, like the grotto in West Bend and the one in Dickeyville. It was built about the same time, so I guess there was a grotto craze.
1915, 1920.
Yeah, like in that range, the 19-teens. Somebody mentioned the Green Lantern. One of the interesting things that came to light, I think, right as we were at the end of the process for writing the book, a photograph of the Green Lantern turned up, which researchers had been looking for, a photograph of the Green Lantern for decades, and one it finally come to light. And one of the reasons I think we didn't include it is because we didn't have a good photo of it.
That's an example of one that we should have, in retrospect. Turns out 100-year-old bar history is a fast-moving field. Andy, should we do our cheers? Are we gonna do?
Oh yeah, let me pour another drink real quick. Actually another one.
Yeah, the other thing to say is that Prohibition was something that I wanted to sort of avoid, or I think both of us did. Like going over well-told stories and trying to find stuff that wasn't really talked about very much. So, for example, the history of music establishments that were also bars, that's sort of a side note. And then I also feel like the gangster history, the Prohibition history is a different story. And it's a story that I think is interesting, and a lot of people have tackled it. And there's good books about gangster St. Paul and mob Minneapolis, and but we didn't really want to delve into that too much. The one speakeasy that is in the book is one that was sort of obscure, Andy. I don't know where you found out about that place, but it was the the Hollyhocks Club, right, which is down by where the Ford plant was or was.
Yeah, down on the that part of St. Paul. And the reason why, we didn't cover the gangster stuff as much is because Paul Maccabee wrote a book called John Dillinger Sleeps Here, which is like comprehensive history and is beautifully written. histories you could find. And actually with the Hollyhocks Bar, which was, a speakeasy where you would go and there was gambling. And a lot of the material for that came from Paul Maccabee's files at the Minnesota Historical Society. You go into the library and you fill out a slip and say, I would like to see Paul Maccabee's, records for writing John Dillinger Slept Here. And, they bring out this cart with just like boxes and boxes, and it's all like meticulously organized. And you open it up and it's got like all the typewritten letters that Paul Maccabees had written to, like all of these people who were at that time, like in their 70s and 80s and, even older, recounting these things that had happened 50 years earlier. And it's all research. It's only about, like 25 years old, but you think like, wow, that's actually a really long time. If somebody was 70 years old, in like the mid 80s.
Yeah, a lot of these joints are places that the older generations still go to, and maybe you go talk to someone. And I'm thinking about Annette from the Terminal Bar, who I've talked to many times, and her father used to own that bar, and her father is the one that started it right after Prohibition in 1935. So she grew up there and knew all about the scene from Central and Hennepin Avenues, in the 50s and 60s and 70s and to the present day. And her memory is so acute to this day, and she just has such a lived experience that I think is going to be lost soon. And so I feel like there's that real sense of when you're researching these old bars, like that, these old timers that are sitting around there and hanging out, they have a lot to share, but no one's been writing this stuff down or recording it or telling these stories. And I think that was one of the reasons why I loved writing this book.
Yeah. Are there other questions that people have?
Yeah, I will boot it up again here.
Okay. I was about to say another bar that I wish had gotten in there now is the Marvel Bar.
Yeah, that's an example. Well, it's not old timers, but it's a place that is gone now.
It's gone now. Yeah, Marvel Bar closed, 2 or 3 weeks ago. And it was really an important part of the kind of the craft cocktail thing that has been going on for the last 10 or 15 years. And I guess that's the kind of place we sort of took for granted. Like, well, like the Marvel Bar will be around. There's no hurry to get to it. But I kind of wish now that we had included it. There was definitely an aspect of wanting to write about places where like we personally had hung out. There's sort of an enjoyment to that. One that I really wanted to get in there actually was the bar at the Bedlam on the West Bank.
For sure.
Which the heyday was kind of the, late 2000s. And I used to hang out there all the time, and it was just a really like magical place. But it was it didn't quite work out in terms of getting, the people to go on the record about stuff. And, So.
Did you try, Andy? I didn't know that.
Yeah, I talked to a couple of the folks that were involved, and for a variety of reasons, they weren't, for a variety of reasons, they
I mean, partly this is a question that came up here is that like it's how do you think COVID-19 is going to affect these places? And one of the things that you learn about the bar industry is that it's a very marginal business, and especially because you're dealing with vice, in general, alcohol isn't the greatest thing for human health. And so there's just like this fragility to a lot of establishments where they are constantly under attack from gentrification on one side, right? Or like being closed down for crime on the other, or whatever. Like that there's this very thin window where bars can sort of thrive in Twin Cities or anywhere. And so it's kind of a I remember when we were debating what to call the book, like the closing time, we chose that name because there are a couple different reasons. One, there's a pretty okay semisonic song. Is that my pronounce? Is semisonic?
No, members of semisonic may be on this call. There's
a
difference.
Well, whatever. It's a cool song, and it's a local song. So, but it evokes a specific moment in the bar where you're closing, you turn the lights on, all of a sudden everyone's fluorescent, well lit, and it's like it gets very real at that moment. You have to decide where you're going to go next, and so that's like a nice evocative sort of thing. And but I remember you saying about the name that we don't want to like talk about closing time, like the bars are all going to close, right? And this was a concern that came up about the connotations of the name. I don't know. It's an interesting debate, but now I'm like worried even more so because the 1 or 2 or 3 year period where bar sales are going to be meaningfully impacted by this pandemic disease, right? I don't know how long it's going to be, and no one knows. And so a lot of the places that I find the most interesting are the most marginal ones, the ones that survive in a neighborhood that doesn't seem like it fits perfectly with where they are at. They're sort of temporarily sort of a little bit out of sync with other parts of the city or whatever, or and what's going to happen to those places? Like, and I don't know. Do you know, Andy?
In fact, I do. No, I don't. But I was thinking about this because I think there's a lot. If we were writing this book now, there's maybe aspects of these stories that we would be interested in highlighting. I look back actually to see if any of the bars that we wrote about were affected by the 1918 influenza epidemic, and it turns out quite a few were. There is a chapter about a bar called Little Jake's in the book, and it's one of my favorite chapters. It's a series of bars that are kind of near where Murray Steakhouse is now. That Murray Steakhouse building is kind of the last vestige of that era, but that was at the end. That was at the edge of the liquor patrol limits. So
that was near Club Nankin, also, I believe.
I think
Nankin Cafe.
I think Nankin was a little. Well, I don't want to say. I'm not sure because that's one of those things where like I could definitely be wrong. And
it moved anyway. Yeah. I think it was in the same area.
There was an early Chinese restaurant there called John's Restaurant. That was one of the upstairs, but a couple of the bars in that row were specifically shut down by the Board of Health in November, December of 1918. For being scofflaws for kind of staying open, and were specifically singled out as being required to close by the Board of Health. And then a lot of those places closed a couple months after that. I mean, they were sort of the punch of the flu pandemic that shut down a lot of business, especially for saloons. A lot of these places were owned by Germans, so there was a lot of real anti-German sentiment during the World War I, after World War I. And so that affected things. And then, of course, in 1919, you get Prohibition, which shuts them all down. So it was just that 1, 2, 3 of the flu pandemic, anti-German sentiment, and then Prohibition that just wiped out a lot of these places. And I hope that the historical footprint will not be as severe, this time. I mean, I don't think it'll be like Prohibition where these places are required to close for 12 years, but yeah, there's kind of a fragility to these places in the best of times. And yeah, I think kind of getting them all in this book feels a little bit more urgent in some ways than maybe it did when we were writing it even.
Yeah.
I would encourage everybody that is watching this. There is a Google document that was set up in March. I think if you do a Google search for "Tip Your Bartenders," MPLS St. Paul, it takes you to the spreadsheet where bar workers that have been adversely affected by COVID-19 have kind of set up like a mutual aid fund or an assistance fund. So you can go find like even specific bartenders from your favorite bars, and you can send them some money directly. So if you have a couple extra dollars and are able to do that, do a Google search for that and look for some of those folks. And if there's someone from a bar that you know and love, send them a little bit of money if you can.
Andy, on that note, should we do our cheers?
Oh, yeah, let's do it.
Okay, what are you drinking, Andy?
I'm drinking a Rob Roy. It's all that's left in my liquor collection. Actually, with look, take a look at this. The Marvel Bar Bitters.
Wow, very well done. Very well done.
Well,
Andy,
yeah.
I'm drinking some Kentucky bourbon. So should we do our cheers here?
Yeah, cheers.
Okay.
Was that convincing enough, everybody? Let's try that one more time.
We practiced that.
Yeah. Cheers, Bill. I think there's a little bit of a lag.
Well.
Yeah, you get the idea.
Yeah, I think it worked really elegantly. Our CGI budget was cut at the last minute.
Yeah, well,
basically the problem. Let's see. other questions. So, what about like American Legions and VFWs, Andy? Did that cross your mind writing this book at all?
It did. That's another one where I kind of wish that we'd gotten some of those in. Just because those are interesting spaces that are, definitely kind of fit the fit the theme of the book. Like Bill said, we tried to stay away from places that were strictly either restaurants or music venues, just because that territory is covered pretty well. But yeah, I kind of wish that we'd gotten one in, like the Ballantine VFW in Uptown would have been.
Oh yeah, that's a great example.
Really good, obvious choice. Or like there's the Eagles Club, which I live near, and
another great example.
Yeah, it just feels like a really wonderful kind of time capsule, in a way that the people that have been going there for a long time still go there, but you still go there and you find young people and or younger people anyway, and it's just this really great mix of ages.
I think that actually answers another question that I think is interesting here that is in this chat message, which is, what's the recipe for a great and long-lasting Twin Cities bar? Is it different for each city? I would say not different for each city necessarily, although there's
definitely. It is though. I know it's totally different. Like a good St. Paul bar is a lot different than a good Minneapolis bar, I think.
Okay, but no, a long-lasting one though.
A long-lasting,
so one that'll last 50 years or more. I feel like one of the big things you need to have is that intergenerational quality. Like if you are just catering to 20-somethings or old-timers and that's it, right? You're not creating that longevity. That's one of the things about a great bar that I really think is so valuable, is when you get, like, one of the things that brought us both together is our appreciation of Nye's Polynesium in the early 2000s. Like, not today, and not before our time, but like just around the late 90s, early 2000s, 2010, kind of that period. Like Nye's was wonderful, and one of the reasons I liked it so much was because you had that intergenerational mix. Like you had it was like passing the baton to the next group of people who appreciated strange traditions, and you could really savor in, like, oh, that old man is singing some karaoke right now, and we can all appreciate that. Or, wow, look at the world's most dangerous polka band, and they're amazing, right? And so you have like 20-year-olds dancing to the music of a 50-year-old woman playing the barking dog polka. That's, to me, when a bar becomes amazing, is when you get that intergenerational connection. And I think that's why bars last, great ones do, is because you cultivate that sort of community. I don't know. That's one of my answers.
Theory I'm going to try out here. I don't know. Tell me what you think of this. If you were going to separate it up by what makes a great Minneapolis bar, what makes a great St. Paul bar, a great Minneapolis bar, and one with some longevity, has to be one that is pulling from way, way outside its geographic area, right? Like with Northeast aside, most neighborhoods in Minneapolis, in some ways, won't really support a long-lasting neighborhood bar. Like I think that's, if you think about places like Matt's or Nye's or, even like the Red Dragon, they're pulling from all over because there's some attraction that makes people want to come to them. Whereas I think the St. Paul bars are a lot different. Like the ones that are the longest lives are the ones that are pulling from like basically walking distance of the bar. I mean, you go into a place like the Spot Bar or, any one of these, like neighborhood St. Paul bars, and if you even Mancini's is like this to some extent. I think, like, if you are in one of those places and you're from Minneapolis, like, you are really the exception, like, because most people in there like are from either very close by or have roots very close by.
Yeah, I think you're getting at something really interesting, which is the connection bars have to the neighborhoods that they're in. And
yeah, I was talking to a guy that had read the book kind of early on, and he was saying that, like, the thing that as far as the difference between Minneapolis and St. Paul bars for him that really came through, even going back like 50, 100 years, is that the Minneapolis bars were places where people came in from like the suburbs, or like the 1950s, 1920s equivalent of the suburbs, to go party and then go back home. Whereas the St. Paul bars were places that were really supported by the immediate neighborhoods. But again, slightly reductive theory, but
I do think it is a little reductive because I feel like when you say northeast aside, Minneapolis bars are X, Y, or Z. That's a very large aside.
that's a big
Um,
aside. Yeah.
and a lot of what's in the book is some of the history of Minneapolis and sort of the erasure of the bar culture. Basically, in the 1880s, the mayor of Minneapolis decided all the bars should be in very specific neighborhoods: Northeast, West Bank, downtown, and anything outside of that was anathema to the zoning code and the culture, right? And then they bulldozed all the bars downtown, basically, and so you left the West Bank and Northeast as the two places that had a rich bar history. And so I don't know, Northeast does have that tradition, and in fact, you go to Northeast and it's like you're in St. Paul. There are people who are living in the neighborhood that are very closely tied to. One of my favorites is the nightcap.
That would have been a strong contender for inclusion. Yeah.
Yeah, and just such a weird joint that's still there. And all the bars in Northeast are on the same side of 4th Street Northeast because of these arbitrary line that the city leaders drew in 1884. So the west side of the street was okay to have bars. The east side, it's not okay. And you walk down the street today, and it's still kind of like that.
Yeah. Bill,
I don't know. Connecting to your community is very important.
Yeah, I agree. I think I have a real quick correction that we both have to make.
Oh, no.
Yeah, well, so both Bill and I got married while we were in the process of writing this book. I was kind of at the beginning of the process and Bill at the end. In our haste to get it to press, we both neglected to include our spouses in the dedication section. So I think we should take the time now to give a toast to our spouses.
Okay.
Hey, Leah.
My wife is downstairs right now, and cheers to them for putting up with us.
Yeah, cheers to our spouses for putting up with us. Hey, Leah. Leah was kind of shaking her head during the Nyes section of our conversation because in the time that we were dating, I somehow failed to take her to Nyes. That's a pretty big oversight.
She married you anyway. I'm very surprised.
Yeah, I know, right? I mean, that actually is that's probably grounds for dismissal. You don't take someone you're dating to Nyes. That really is that was kind of a really important step in the process for her.
Andy, I have a question about meat raffle. Do you have any thoughts about either? I'm going to throw it out: meat raffle or pull tabs.
Bill, I feel like you're better situated to answer this one than I am. I guess sorry.
If you see a meat raffle or pull tabs at the bar you're at, you know you're in the right place. That is the first rule of thumb, I would say.
Do you feel like the meat raffles and the pull tabs are kind of a Minnesota statewide thing? Because I feel like they are, right? I wouldn't necessarily make a distinction that they're specifically Twin Cities aspects of going to a bar.
I think I see them everywhere in Minnesota. Meat raffles a little more rare. Pull tabs is a little more common. One of the things I like about both of those is that they connect the bar to some sort of charity. You're not raffling off meat for nothing, just for fun. The money goes to the softball team, the Catholic Church, the Boy Scouts, some group that deserves it, and that connection is to me a rich, meaningful thing. Yeah. Even though you're also winning a steak, or in my case, I've only won the meat raffle once.
I've never won
so not winning a steak in my case.
Yeah, one of the questions we really kind of struggled with as we were writing the book is what makes a Twin Cities bar, like a bar in Minneapolis or St. Paul, different than a bar in rural Minnesota. And I don't know. I'm to be honest, I'm not sure that we completely successfully answered that question. Because there is so much crossover. It's hard to identify specific things that are yes, this makes this a Minneapolis bar, as opposed to a bar you might find, like in Bemidji or Moorhead or, Marshall.
Yeah, I think one of the answers is the sort of diversity and the kind of cultural mixing and changing. And if you read our book, which you should all do, you should all buy this book.
Yeah, please.
Time. It's really good. If you think listening to us blab is interesting, no, this is where the good stuff is. But there's stories in here about sort of gender and different race kind of immigration waves and African American community and what else, Andy? There's the softball team stuff, like very vicious football competitions, and
Yeah.
religion is in here, politics is in here.
Yeah. I mean, like the bars are kind of microcosms for larger social goings on, whether they relate to, again, like Bill was saying, gender or race or any of these other
and prurience.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the great characters in the book is A.B. Cassius, who ran the Cassius Bar in downtown Minneapolis, which was just like this real hub for the African American community for decades. You would get all these great stories of when African American people would be coming up from Mississippi or the South to find work. They would go to the Cassius Bar first. They talk to Cassius, and he would kind of set them up or get them oriented, tell them where to go, and it served this really kind of critical function in the community. It's sort of a community hub, in the same way that like a church might be or a community center might be.
And that was true. That's actually, I think, the common denominator that stretches from the 19th century to the present day is that bars became these places where people could go and find community when you needed it most, right? Like, so if you just moved to just move to a city or from somewhere, it could be another different state, or it could be a different country, and finding people who you can relate to and will help you out. And bars became this link for folks in very different ways. And I think that's a function that's super important,
Yeah.
And that's why I worry sort of today about what's happening at the moment is like, what can we do to make sure that these places survive, even though they're in great jeopardy?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know, Andy, do you have any closing thoughts on closing time here?
I don't know if I do. I think we covered most of it. Were there any other rapid fire questions we didn't get to? Or
Let me see. I'm looking at it.
Your hour's about up. An hour is about as long as you can do these kinds of things without having your face melt.
Bill and I got married leaves the wrong impression, Andy, apparently. To other people, I should mention.
Well, we're kind of, Bill and I were married, in a more metaphorical sense in terms of the partnership that it requires to.
You have a book together. That's a big deal.
A book, yeah. Reading a book is a lot.
I think we've been over most of these questions. I don't see anything pressing, so I would just say it's really wonderful. One of my favorite things about this has been hearing all the stories and making connections with folks who appreciate our bar history in the same way I do, and I've learned a lot since the book came out, just from folks who like reach out and wonder about different places. And I would just say to anyone watching right now, please keep doing that. You can find me or Andy on the internet pretty easily because we're on there. And if you have cool stories about bars in Minneapolis, St. Paul, or anywhere in the Twin Cities or Minnesota, just let us know, and we'd love to chat about it. Do you have anything to add, Andy?
No, I just look forward to the day where we can all go out and safely enjoy each other's company again.
The latest rules are you have to be outside or something. So that'll be challenging for a lot of traditionally old bars didn't have windows, and there was a big inside-outside distinction. So I'm actually curious to see what will happen in the next month or two.
Maybe it'll finally come to pass where you can get like in New Orleans, where you get like carry out drinks and you can walk around the street drinking them. Maybe
that would be such a departure from traditional Minnesota morality.
Things are changing fast. You never know.
Yeah. Anyways, well, let's drink to that, Andy, and maybe call it a day here.
All right.
All right.
Cheers. I think we did pretty well. Let's try one more time. Cheers. I think we nailed it.
Until we meet again, Andy.
Until we meet again. Thanks everybody for hanging in with us.
Yeah, thanks very much. That was fun.